Hi friends, welcome to the Share, Invite, Proclaim channel. My name is Judy. It's been a while since I have posted, and so let me review a little bit in our study of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 1 and 2, Jesus Christ is superior to angels. In chapter 3, Jesus Christ is superior to Moses. In chapter 4, Jesus Christ is the provider of God's rest. Chapter 5 and 7, Jesus Christ is our high priest and is superior to the Levitical line of priests. Chapter 6, chapter 10, certain verses in 11, certain verses in 12. Jesus Christ provides a superior hope for Christians in face of conflicts and apostasy. Chapter 8, 9, and 10, Jesus Christ provides a superior covenant from the old covenant, which is the law. Chapter 11, a superior life of faith in Jesus Christ, modeled by Old Testament witnesses. We've talked about Abel and Enoch and Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and today Moses. Moses had a superior life of faith in God. There's several books that I would recommend. Chuck Swindoll has a wonderful book on Moses. I have also used a lot of information about historical things from the second edition of Understanding the Old Testament by Bernard Anderson. And then a little bit of help from the History of Israel, third edition by John Bright. Because I always come up with some questions that, I'll talk about. So today we're going to talk about the superior life of faith that Moses had in God. We know that by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden in a basket, and he he was sent down the Nile River, and near the bathing spot of the princess, Pharaoh's daughter, and she heard the baby crying. She sends her maid down to pick up the baby and opens it up and says, "This is a Hebrew baby." Now, I'm thinking, how would she know it's a Hebrew baby? Hebrew babies she could have killed him. Pharaoh had wanted the male babies to be killed because their population had increased so much that Pharaoh and his counselors were afraid of the increased power, perhaps, of the Israelites because of their number. And so, how did she know it was a Hebrew baby? Was it the skin tone? Was it the hair? I don't know. And also, his sister, Miriam, was watching and also saw that Moses had been rescued by the princess. And so she suddenly appears. Was that, did she have the freedom to approach a princess? Could she have been killed? And then, of course, she asks the princess if she can go and find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. And of course, that is his mother. But then by faith, Moses refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He lived in the palace for 40 years. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But he became impatient and anxious over a taskmaster who was beating a Hebrew person. And Moses interfered and ended up killing this taskmaster. And when Pharaoh found out about it, he wanted to kill Moses. So Moses has to escape. And he chose to endure hardship. He went into the desert for 40 years, and we'll talk about that. And then Moses left Egypt, went to Midian in southern Saudi Arabia. And he went to a village where there was a priest by the name of Jethro. Jethro had 7 daughters, and he invites Moses to to come to the family and marry one of his daughters, Zipporah. Because he was priest, he had to have had a sense of the hand of God on Moses. Moses and Zipporah had a child, and he spent the next 40 years in the wilderness. And then, I think, why 400 years? Couldn't God have chosen someone else before Moses to free the Israelites? Why delay 400 years? Well, it may be that during most of that time, there was not a problem with the Israelites. They were shepherds, and the Egyptians tended not to like shepherds. So they kind of were in their own. And only within the last few years of that time frame were they enslaved, and they began to cry out to God. And that was an issue, but also, what's going on in Canaan during this 400 years? There's a lot of other tribes that are there, and God was protecting that space from the invasion of other major empires like the Assyrians or the Babylonians. Well, Midian was a desert area where God could prepare Moses for a particular task. He was building Moses' character. For 40 years, he builds his character in the desert, and then brings him 40 years back into the desert after he brings the Israelites out of Egypt. Why does God lead us through difficult times or through wilderness places? Well, to humble us, to test us, to refine us, because we're born in sin. Swindoll says that while Moses was in the palace, he had a pretty good liberal arts education. He learned hieroglyphics, science, literature, military tactics, medicine, astronomy, chemistry, theology, philosophy, law, sculpture, music, painting. Quite a bit. It would take 40 years, huh? But in the desert for 40 years, God had some courses for him to take there. He couldn't escape them. His 4 cases that Swindoll says he had to take: pride, fear, resentment, and bitterness, and discomfort and hardship. We'll talk about those. Well, finally, in Exodus chapter 3, Moses is at the Mount Horeb, which is the same word as Sinai. And with no warning, God speaks on an ordinary day. An angel appeared to Moses in a blazing fire in a bush. And Moses turned to the bush, and God spoke to him. God was checking out his humility, his sensitivity, his availability. Someone that would slow down enough to hear his voice and do what he asked him to do. God identified himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God had a plan for Moses. He said, I will send you. I will bring my people out. Now, Moses had been in the palace, for 40 years, so the splendor of the palace did not distract him, whereas it might have someone else. But Moses said, well, why me, Lord? I'm just a shepherd boy. I stumble over my words. Well, God wanted to change his character to accomplish this task. Moses knew what it was like to run from Egypt, and the Israelites needed a leader that would help them run from Egypt. Moses knew what it was like to live in a desert, and the Israelites spent 40 years in the desert. Moses was a pretty important character. He and Elijah even met Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration to encourage Jesus as he was approaching his death. God had a conversation with Moses in chapter 6 of Exodus. He said, I am the Lord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Fix your eyes on the Lord, he's saying. And then he gave some great promises. He said, see what I will do. I will bring. I will deliver. I will redeem. I will take. I will be. I will give. Great promises. Now, God had planned to use Moses in presenting some plagues to get Moses' attention, but also to tell the world what was going on with this one true God. And he used these different plagues: the blood, frogs, gnats, insects, livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and a death angel. Exodus 7 through 12. And these didn't fall upon the Israelites in Goshen. They were designed for the Egyptians. And it was designed to get Pharaoh's attention, but also the attention of the rest of the world. God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Now, one major thing that Moses did was his boldness in the Red Sea experience. This miracle was for the world to see God's power. Many of the other miracles that would happen in the wilderness were for the Israelites, but this one was bold. This one was something that was known throughout the rest of the world. Moses raises his staff, the waters part, the Israelites go across on dry land, and then when they're on the other side, Pharaoh and his army are chasing them. They go into the area, and God removes the wall of water, and it comes down over them and destroys them. Moses even wrote a song about that. He said, praise to God for destroying Pharaoh and his army. Is there anyone like you, O God, majestic in your holiness? In your loving kindness, you redeemed your people. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. Well, why did God choose the wilderness route for the Israelites? Well, they had to depend upon God for their food and water. They had to follow God's roadway in the desert by a cloud by day and a fire by night. God had to change their character. Their lifestyle had been Egyptian. All of them had been born in Egypt. Their habits, their styles, their food, everything was of an Egyptian influence. God had to teach them a new lifestyle. Well, how did Moses rid himself of pride and fear and resentment and bitterness and discomfort and hardship? Well, he surrendered to the leadership of God. He worshiped God. He used boldness, stepped out of his comfort zone to be used by God in face of a powerful foe. How did God move Moses from pride to humility? Pride would be self-centeredness, feeling invincible and not accountable for his actions in Egypt. But he was moved from pride to humility. He was God-centered. 40 years in the desert, there were no distractions from the sins of the city. He was loyal to his father-in-law as a shepherd. God was preparing him for a God-sized task. He was accountable to God. And he was bold in leaving his safety zone to serve God. How did God move Moses from fear? Fear is why he had to leave Egypt, because Pharaoh found out about his murder, to trust, boldness, courage, hope, and obedience. Well, boldness for Moses to give the plagues and to speak to Pharaoh, and trust for God to open the Red Sea for escape. Courage to communicate through Aaron God's plan of escape. Hope, as the Hebrews said, God helped Moses look down through history in the book of Hebrews chapter 11. God allowed him to look down through history and see Jesus Christ. How did God move Moses from discomfort and hardship? Discomfort and hardship, he had to leave his family in Egypt, all his relatives behind. Midian was the complete opposite of Egypt, different food and comforts. But he moved him to calmness and confidence and composure and assurance. He felt safety in Midian with his life and new family. How did God move Moses from resentment and bitterness to forgiveness and joy and change expectations? Resentment and bitterness, well, he was treated unfairly. He had some tense relationships, feeling of regret or frustration. Could have been frustrated to have a Hebrew family at his early age, and then being called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and the complete opposite of his early life, conflict between the two. He had to choose. Resentment and bitterness to forgiveness, joy, change expectations. Twice in Moses' writing, he sings a song, joy in worshiping. He worshiped his entire time that we read about him in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Pentateuch. Change expectations. God gave them victory against the Amaleks, Amalek. Amaleks attacked Israel. When Moses raised his hand, the Israelites won. They were winning. When his hands dropped, the Amaleks were winning. So Aaron put Moses on a rock, set him down, and Moses and Hur raised his arms so that the Israelites would win. And after that, then Moses builds an altar and calls it God, the Lord is my banner. Banners just sort of tell us what's there, and the Lord is my banner. So some of the things that God had to change out of Moses was his character. Was he worshiped God Almighty. He believed in the oral history of the Hebrews. He surrendered to God's plan, and he was willing to change. At one point, Moses was so overwhelmed with tasks that his father-in-law Jethro told him to select some men that would take care of minor disputes, and then they would bring the major disputes to Moses, and that would free up some of his time. Now, Hebrews stops at that point of Moses leading the Israelites through the Red Sea, but there's a whole big group of things that Moses would show his faith, his superior faith in God. 45 days in the wilderness journey, the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and Moses told them that their grumbling was against God, not him. And God then provided quail for them to eat, bread to eat, and they ate this food for 40 years. And then the Israelites journeyed by stages. And that's the way character changes, by stages. And that's how our spiritual growth happens, by stages. The Israelites complained again after complained for water and grumbled against Moses. And God told Moses to strike a rock, and water came out. Three months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites traveled to Mount Sinai. Moses climbed the mountain to talk with God. God's directions for Moses: obey my voice, keep my commandments, keep my covenant. The directions for the Israelites: be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Moses then would go down the mountain, and he would tell the Israelites God's message, and they would agree to follow it. Moses went up and down this mountain 7 times, 8,000 feet high. Well, God just told Moses that he was going to come to the top of, leave heaven, come to the top of the mountain with thunder and lightning and lightning, thick cloud, a loud trumpet sound, fire, the mountain quaked. God told Moses to warn the people not to go up the mountain or even touch it, or they would die. And I wonder, what would it take for us to recognize God and what he was doing? Would we accept thunder and lightning and all of that? I think it's probably scary us because we don't see it happening much. Well, 3 months after their escape from Egypt, the Israelites, as I said, went to Mount Sinai, and God told Moses to come up the mountain. He comes up and he gives Moses the 10 Commandments, and he writes them on 2 tablets. Have no other gods before me. Make no idols. Worship God only. Don't take God's name in vain. Keep the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor, and do not covet. Moses also, he spent 40 days. He also wrote down ordinances that God told him to write, things like moral laws or judicial laws, like what to do about slaves, what to do about personal injuries or property rights, to start 3 different national feasts like the Unleavened Bread, Feast of the Harvest, Feast of Ingathering. And it would take some time to write all that down. God then told Moses to hurry up and go down the mountain, that God was about ready to destroy all the Israelites. The Israelites were at the bottom of the mountain, and they had convinced Aaron that, hey, we don't know what happened to Moses. He's been gone so long. He's abandoned us. We must make a pagan god like they did in Egypt to worship. And so they bring all their jewels, their gold, and give it to Aaron. He melts it down and fashions it into a golden calf. And then they begin to worship the calf. The calf. Now, while Moses is up on the mountain, where is the leadership of Aaron and these elders? What were they worshiping, or were they even worshiping while Moses was gone? Did Aaron fear the people more than he feared God when they demanded this pagan idol? Aaron had to make this idol. Well, God wanted to kill them all, and Moses had to remind God that because people in the world knew about God's deliverance, that his reputation would be ruined if he killed them in the wilderness, that God wasn't powerful enough to get his people to Canaan. And secondly, Moses reminded God of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that land would go to their descendants. So God changed his mind and did not destroy them then. Now they would have a consequence. But Moses came down. He saw their dancing and their worship of the idol. He became so angry, uncontrolled anger, that he threw the stone tablets down and shattered them. What else did Moses do? Well, he took the golden calf, he burned it, he ground it into powder and scattered it over the water, and then made the Israelites drink it. And then he questioned Aaron for letting the people get out of control. But Aaron said, well, Moses, these people are prone to evil. So he was blaming the people. I just threw it into the fire and out came this calf. So he was denying making the golden calf. I'm surprised that we're not told what the consequence was for Aaron. So God told Moses that he was going to send an angel to lead these people, because if he went, he would probably kill them because they were obstinate. They were sinful. They were disobedient. And again, Moses interceded. And he said, your presence, God, sets us apart from all other people in the world. That was important. God told Moses then to cut out 2 more stone tablets, go back up the mountain, and God gave a second chance to write down the commandments and the ordinances. When he came down, Moses' face was shining so brightly that the people were afraid of him, so he put a veil over his face. So after this incident of sin by the Israelites by worshiping the golden calf, Moses asked God to let him know God's ways. Let me know your ways, God. Tell me how you are distinguished from all other people on earth. God told Moses his ways in Exodus 34. He said, I'm compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness, truthful, I forgive iniquity and transgression and sin, punish the guilty. And so then God told Moses to take a census of all the people who were older than 20. And those would not enter the promised land. Those who complained about the manna, they complained so much that Moses became depressed and said, God, just kill me. I can't take this. So again, God told Moses to select 70 men, and God's Spirit would come upon them, and they would assist Moses. Now, when the Israelites reached the wilderness of Paran, which is south of Kadesh Barnea and west of Edom, Moses sent 12 spies into Canaan, one from each tribe, and they were to go into Canaan to find out what the land was like. They were to find out, what were the people like? Were their cities fortified? Was the land good? Things like that. And so they were gone 40 days, and they returned and gave a bad report. At least 10 of them did. Joshua and Caleb did not. And these 10 men said, well, all the men are like grasshoppers. We are so weak. They are strong. Their cities are fortified. The sons of Anak are there, and they were of the Nephilim. The Nephilim were giants, fallen angels who overtook ungodly men and married women, human women. Resulting in, the Israelites cried all night. They grumbled. They wanted to go back to Egypt. Rose-colored eyes about what it was like in slavery back in Egypt. They were ready to stone Caleb and Joshua and Moses and Aaron. But Joshua and Caleb gave a good report. They said, the land flows with milk and honey. That means prosperity and abundance. And they brought back a sample of that abundance, a branch of cluster of grapes that took 2 men to carry. And they said, if the Lord is pleased with us, don't fear these people. They are our prey. God has removed their protection. Oh, that God would not remove our protection from our country or from our leaders or from our people. God, keep us protected. Moses interceded for the people and reminded God that the nations knew about God's deliverance. And so Moses reminded God of his covenant. So for 40 years, Only Caleb and Joseph and those who were under 20 remained alive. And over time, over the 40-year period, that generation would die in the wilderness. Well, while they are moving around in the wilderness, there was an incident by Korah, two of his friends. He was the grandson of Korath, who would set up and take down the holy objects and the furniture and stuff of the tabernacle. And they convinced 250 other Israelites to rebel against Moses and Aaron. And God told the Israelites to move away from them, that they were wicked men. And that God would do a new thing in punishing them to let them know that God's in control, that God approves of the leadership of Moses. And so what happened was the ground split open. There's a tectonic plate there. The ground split open. Korah and all of those, all their household and their possessions and all the men who rebelled fell into the hole and went to Sheol. Sheol is we call it hell in English. And that was their punishment for their evil. Well, some conclusions. How are we doing on time? Conclusions about the faith of Moses. Well, his faith sustained him. Faith sustains us when we are in wilderness times. And we do have those. When conflict, loss, struggle come our way. It's normal because we live in a fallen world. Paul even wrote to Timothy and said, all who desire to live godly in Jesus Christ will face persecution. Well, sometimes the wilderness is God-driven. He wants to change our character from pride, resentment, favoritism, anger, bitterness, fear, ego, self-centeredness. Move us from that to the task and the relationship that God wants us to have in our lives. He moves us to trust and boldness and humility and courage and hope and accountability and surrender to God's leadership and humility and forgiveness and worship and being full of the Holy Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit. And that's the kind of character God wants to develop in us. And Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness for God to change his character. So the Israelites were in the wilderness to let them realize they had to depend upon God for food, for water, for life, and then also to teach them a new lifestyle because they were Egyptian in their habits, their styles, their food, and their worship practices of sometimes worshiping idols, and that had to change. Every time that the Israelites faced a lack of water or food, they complained to Moses, and sometimes they were ready to stone him and select another leader and go back to Egypt. They looked at their past instead of their future. And they would say to Moses, have you brought us from Egypt to let us die in the wilderness? Do we do that when we focus on our past instead of our future? We see our past with rose-colored eyes. What does God want us to learn when we are in a wilderness? What influence does God want to demonstrate through your faith? What tests have you gone through to cause your faith to grow? What is your safety zone, or what was your safety zone that you needed boldness to step out of in faith to accomplish the task that God has for you? Moses' example of faith influenced their next leader, Joshua. Joshua was allowed to be Moses' assistant and went with him up and down the mountain many times. He would also guard the tent of the tabernacle when needed. Second thing that we conclude as important about Moses is his worship. He led the Israelites in worship when he was establishing the Passover. He would give them God's instructions about Holy Sabbath, working 6 days, resting on the seventh, and worshiping God. And then, going up and down Mount Sinai and giving instructions and the time to worship God. and the institution of 3 national feasts. God told Moses to consecrate Aaron and his sons to be priests to God, and that was in a worship service. What do you do at the burning bush? God told him to take off his sandals. He was standing on holy ground. Anywhere where God is holy ground. And that's where God gave him his mission, to bring the Israelites out of slavery to the land flowing with milk and honey, this land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses worshiped God. Again, after defeating the Amalek, Moses worshiped God throughout his entire life. Now, a third thing, delay doesn't mean abandonment. 40 years of being adopted son and next in line to Pharaoh didn't eliminate the godly influence that his family had on those first few years of his life. And perhaps Moses continued some type of relationship with his birth family. We don't know. But living in 40 years in Midian desert did not stop Moses from receiving God's tasks to lead the Israelites. And 40 days on Mount Sinai to receive God's commandments and ordinances was not a delay. It was not an abandonment. It was a delay to get the information that would change their character. Intercession. This is big. Moses was an intercessor for sure. He first intercessed to Pharaoh and tried to get Pharaoh to let them go 3 days into the wilderness to worship their God and take their animals with them, because they'd have to sacrifice something. And so, but Pharaoh would not let them go. And then 3 days in their journey after the Red Sea experience, they complained about no water. And they went to an area, Marah, and they found that the water was bitter. They couldn't drink it. And so they cried out to Moses. And then Moses cried out to the Lord, and God showed him a tree to throw into the water that made it sweet and able to drink. 15 days of journey from the Red Sea, the Israelites ran out of food and complained. Moses interceded, and God provided quail and manna. As the Israelites continued on their journey, they needed water again. They grumbled. They almost ready to stone Moses, and Moses cried out to the Lord, and God told him to strike a rock, and water came out. When God told Moses the Israelites had made a golden calf, he was instructed to go down to the mountain at once, and Moses, guess God wanted to destroy them, and I've talked about this, and Moses reminded God that the Egyptians and the rest of the world would think God was not powerful enough to free his people, get them to Canaan, and that he had a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he interceded, and God changed his mind. And then Moses interceded for himself and asked God to show him his ways and to see his glory. And so God agreed to show him his glory by letting Moses stand in a split in the rock, and God's glory would pass by, and then God would cover his hand over Moses so that when he passed by, then that Moses could see his back. Eventually, Zipporah died on the journey, and Moses remarried a Cushite woman. Now, there were other national tribes that went with the Israelites when they escaped. Aaron and Miriam were mad because Moses did not consult them about this choice of a marriage partner. And God said to Aaron and Miriam, I speak with Moses face to face. With a prophet, I use a dream or a vision. And their punishment for speaking against Moses was that Miriam became a leper. And Aaron begged Moses to intercede and heal her. And so God did, but she had to stay outside the camp for 7 days, which was the requirement for those who were being healed with leprosy. Moses interceded to God for the Israelites and asked for God to forgive their sin. While wandering in the desert, 3 Levi priests encouraged these Levites to, encouraged 250 other Israelites to go against Moses, and Moses asked God to bring about a new thing, and that was that they were sent to hell. The next day, the Israelites complained that Moses and Aaron were the ones who caused the death of God's people. They shifted the blame of their sin onto Moses and Aaron. God said, get away from these people. I'm going to kill them right now. And then Moses quickly told Aaron to make a sacrifice for the people. And before he could even get it done, God had killed 14,000 plus people for their sin. Moses interceded to God, asking on 3 occasions to let him into the promised land. Why didn't God honor that request? Well, in Numbers 20, we find out that the Israelites grumbled for water, and God told Moses to speak to the rock and water would come out. And when the Israelites gathered before the rock, Moses was so angry, he called them rebels. Uncontrolled anger, as Swindoll would say. And he struck the rock twice and water came out. And this was a sin because they were seeing Moses' anger, not God's provision. And he was told that's why he could not go into the promised land. Another time, Moses interceded for the people when they were impatient because they had to go around Edom. The people complained about God and Moses, and they complained that they didn't have any food or water. They were loathing this manna. And God responded to their complaint by sending fiery serpents who would bite many of them and they would die. Moses interceded to God, and God responded by telling him to make a bronze serpent and put it on a rod. And if anyone was bitten, if they looked to the bronze serpent, they would live. And these are the times that Moses was so angry. And back to this issue of them complaining about the quail and the manna. Moses just said, I am so tired of them. Just kill me, God. Just kill me. And God sent so much quail to the Israelites, 3 feet deep of quail, as far as you could walk in a day's walk in any direction, to show God's provision. And God gave a plague to those who were greedy and sinful. God also gave Moses second chances. After he had broken the tablets at the base of the mountain, when he was gone for 40 days and 40 nights, God had him cut out 2 more tablets and go back up on the mountain, and God gave him the commandments again. What kind of second chances has God given us? I pray that God continues to give our nation, our leaders, ourselves, second, maybe even third or fourth chances to become the people of God. To allow God to continue to change our character so that we are useful and fulfill the task that God has for us. Moses went to Mount Nebo, and God showed him all the land of Canaan and where the Israelites were going to inherit. And then God buried Moses in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite of Beth Peor. No one knows the specific place because God didn't want a tomb to become a shrine. Well, this is a little bit longer than I normally like to talk about a particular person or passage, but Moses is big. And I hope that God blesses you in hearing it and that it helps you in your quest for God to be changing your character to be used by God. Thanks for watching.